Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Let's talk food now. Food is very important. In fact, if you ask people what are the three most important things for them to survive, one that you'll get a lot of persons to mention is food for the stomach before they even mention shelter and then clothing. So let's talk food. As of September 2024, food inflation in Nigeria stood at 32.77%, which was on a year-on-year basis about 7.13 percentage points higher than what was recorded in the year 2023. It brings to the fore the importance of improving food security in Nigeria because everybody eats. Some may not like to go shopping for clothes and other things, but food indeed is a basic necessity for survival. We have Maurice Ekpong speaking to these issues this morning as he joins virtually. Hello, Maurice. Good morning.
Good morning. Blessing, nice to connect with you virtually today.
All right, Maurice, I want to ask this morning, have you had breakfast? Have you had some food?
Okay, I haven't, but definitely my children had food before going to school.
You see how important it is. Man must eat. And to have food in abundance, it means that we need to have production that is adequate for Nigeria. One of the factors that have led to increase in inflation rate in Nigeria is food inflation. For a country a country like Nigeria that has much arable land, shouldn't we be talking about food insecurity?
I mean, definitely, that's one of the many paradoxes in our beloved Nigeria. You know, you have abundance around. You have potential to have an overflow for everybody, and yet everybody is going around with a sense of real scarcity. You know, because of the challenges. So Nigeria shouldn't have a challenge with scarcity because of the, of course, availability of land, like you have mentioned, availability of labor to work on the farms, and all of those agroclimatic conditions that should ideally support, the growth of commercial scale the development of commercial scale agriculture. So it's a paradox that we live in a lot of food insecurity in the midst of such potential.
Food inflation rate of 37.77% for the month of September. Isn't that too high? What could be some of the factors contributing to the rise in food inflation?
I mean, the key driver, of course, would come from, looking at the supply end, right? As usual, once demand exceeds supply, prices are likely to go up. So we are in a situation where production is low, food production is low, where a lot of farmers are not put to work, where insecurity is displacing people in farming communities. And in certain areas, of course, the challenges with climate change, weather, flooding, destroying agricultural commodities and all of that, so all of these add to reduce or impact negatively on the production side. So food is not coming to the market as much as it should. So definitely that's a key driver for food inflation.
If we have arable land, yet there is food insecurity, what are some of the things that we could do with the arable land to ensure that food is available? You mentioned supply being one of the issues. Where there isn't much supply and the demand is high, of course, price will go high. Aside the issue of insecurity, is it that with the arable land, we have just left it to the land to determine what comes out as yield? What can we do more with the land to ensure more yield?
Yeah, so that's a very important question. Again, there are quite a number of issues that allow land to live, fallow and unused. One is that in this country, we have a lot of fragmentation of land, right? So if you point to any, say, 5 acres of land, there might be 3 or 4 families, that lay claim to it. So it becomes very difficult for you to assess land, right? For you to engage in commercial scale agriculture because of that kind of fragmentation. So that's one. And that's a very key factor. So of course, the issue of land ownership needs to be looked at. Streamlining access to land, acquisition or lease for commercial scale agriculture from a policy point of view is also something that is very important. That is a very important factor. That's one. And then again, even for the lands that are under cultivation, you find that the practices are still very artisanal, right? So you are not getting the kind of output that you typically get. So while, for instance, the Nigerian farmer struggles with like a yield of, say, 6 to 7 tons of cassava tubers per hectare, right? In a country like Malaysia or Indonesia, people get up to like 40 tons. So if you look at that against the backdrop that Nigeria is the biggest producer of cassava in the world, for instance, you can see that if we can even increase our output of a crop like a cassava marginally by 50%, you can see that we would become massive exporters of the different variants of products that can come from a crop like cassava. And that affects other commodities, agricultural commodities as well. It affects cashews, it affects soybean, it affects rice, it affects groundnuts, and so on and so forth. So a lot needs to be done to improve yield in the lands that are under cultivation to have a positive impact on food security in the country.
The 3 biggest producers of food in the world are US, China, and India. What has helped these 3 countries to be very sufficient in food production that Nigeria perhaps hasn't really keyed into?
Yeah, so if you look at agriculture in US, India, China, and even a country like the Netherlands, right? You see that agriculture in this country is driven by technology. So technology is a key driver. So where it will take say 20 Nigerians to walk 1 plot of land, it will take probably 1 minute for technology to achieve that. So it becomes very difficult for Nigeria to match the output of India, like you have mentioned, of the US, like you have mentioned, and even the Netherlands, China, and all the other countries that are major exporters of agricultural commodities. Now, let's come to a country like the Netherlands, because when you mention the US, when you mention India, these are huge countries by landmass, a lot bigger than Nigeria. But if you look at the Netherlands is probably the size of, say, a Lagos, Lagos state, right? With slightly less, about the same or slightly less population than Lagos state has, depending on the statistics that you're looking at. But the Netherlands, is the 2nd biggest exporters of agricultural commodities after the US, in spite of the small land that they have, in spite of the small population that they have, because they basically use technology. So, technology is a key differentiator here between countries that are massive, in agricultural production against countries that are struggling. And it's a real paradox, because you look at Africa, you look at Nigeria, all the agroclimatic conditions are there. If you take a state like Niger state can feed the whole of Africa, right? Because it has the land, it has the agroclimatic conditions. It has the water, that you require, for commercial scale agriculture. So, so policy that encourages the use of technology, right, that moves a lot of small-scale farmers from being artisanal, both in production and in processing, can help attain some level of food security in the country. I mean, I know you haven't mentioned this, but one of the drivers of food insecurity in Nigeria, in Africa, and in fact, even around the world, is waste. Because if you look at the statistic globally, more than 30% or about 30% of the food that is produced in the world is wasted, from the farm gate all the way, to the table. So if we can develop technology or a process that reduces waste, that can quite help reduce the impact of food insecurity in the country.
About reducing waste, we would also need to look at processing. Now, while you were talking on the screen, you could see some farms where vegetables were cultivated, how they were being packaged, and they looked very clean, almost ready to use. But if you go to the typical markets in Nigeria, what you find is different, except you go to maybe some shops now that have it that way. And some of this contributes to wastage. What should we be looking at in terms of processing that doesn't just preserve the food, but also add value to the food?
It's very important. You see, the challenge, I believe that the challenge with agriculture in Nigeria is policy, right? Government year in, year out spends both billions of dollars for agriculture, for inputs and all of that. But the strategy isn't right. It's very easy. You have 6 geopolitical zones in this country. You have different ecological zones. Every state has the capacity to produce different varieties and different types of agricultural commodities, i.e. what you can produce in, say, a state like in Adamawa or Kano or Katsina or Zamfara would be diametrically different from what you can produce in a state like Bayelsa or Rivers or Ondo, right? So we need strategy that basically cites, even if it is cottage industries in different locations, to both offtake and add value to products from the market, from the farm gate. So that would reduce wastage. That would encourage the farmers to produce more if they know that there's a ready market. And then that would, increase the shelf life and the quality of our product. So it is not only fit for local consumption in the country, but is exportable, right? So this is not rocket science. We need to basically develop a strategy that works. And that strategy is something that we can implement. This can be implemented in Nigeria. You don't need more than 12 months to implement this strategy after planning. So, situating cottage industries for agro-processing in different, maybe local governments. We can take the 774 local governments, right? That basically collects and processes, adds value to these products, and then, exports them to other parts of the country and even internationally. So it's not rocket science. This is something that can be done. But do we have the stomach to do that as a country? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves.
Talking about having the stomach to do that as a country, let's get back again to examples like US, India, China. What they've been able to achieve in agricultural production, was it orchestrated, structured by the government, or strictly private efforts? Oh, that's been a glitch. I do hope that we can get back to the conversation with Maurice as his connection has become unstable. But let's talk about this, you and I. If we're looking at countries like the US, China, and India, Netherlands, what they've been able to do with food security, even Ukraine in a war situation is still being able to export food to other parts of the country. Can we say this was a government initiative, a private effort, or a combination of both? What do we need to do in Nigeria? Well, I'm going to answer some of that for you while you can send in your comment. Just go to the channel and type your comment, or you could drop a comment on any of our social media platforms. It's at SOUQ News TV on Facebook, on Instagram, on X. So let's talk about this for a while. If you look at the way farming is done in Nigeria, it's basically at subsistence level. So I have some space at the back of my house. I choose to farm maybe vegetables for my consumption. If I have a bigger space, I could choose to sell some to you or to some willing buyer. Except for some regions of the country where you have many individuals come together to run a farm and then they sell to other parts of the country. But there are really no government farms that you can point to. Government, on the other hand, in Nigeria, support farmers with certain things like funds. It could be with seedlings, maybe farm extension workers, and some other things the government would need. But if we want to be food sufficient, very sufficient as the other countries, what do you think needs to be done more to improve what is currently achieved? I threw the question to you and I'm expecting your answer. In the meantime, I need to go to a quick break. The show returns shortly. Stay.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
This is still Early Exchange. The conversation is on food security, achieving this using technology for Nigeria. And our guest remains Maurice Ekpong, who is an Executive Director, African Journal for Sustainable Development. Maurice, we're having a great conversation when internet connection from your end became poor. Don't worry, I've prayed. I've prayed seriously and it is back. Okay, now getting back to the conversation now. Achieving food security using technology. So I threw a question to the audience, and I'm going to ask you that same question now. If we're looking at the examples of US, China, Netherlands, let's not even go as far as the US because you say they have more landmass than we do in Nigeria. But if the way they've approached agriculture has led to food security and also giving them a lot of income because they export to other countries, what have they done right that we haven't quite done? Has the success in food production been achieved by government initiative or private efforts? What are we missing?
Okay, so I lost you a little bit, so I didn't quite get the full gist of your question. But if I understand,
I'm going to go over it again. If we're looking at what countries like Netherlands have done in food production, achieving food sufficiency, and also generating lots of income from food exports, could this success have been achieved by government initiative or private effort, or even a combination of both? What are we missing out in Nigeria?
Okay, so what are we missing in Nigeria? I think first of all, the gumption, the will, the stomach to address the problems isn't there. It is one thing to have a program, it is one thing to have a plan, but quite another to follow through to logical conclusion. Nigeria has some of the brightest minds of country. Whereas you look virtually in every space, in every place where things are happening around the world, you find Nigerians behind it, right? But right here in Nigeria, we have protracted problems because first, the political will isn't there to follow through. Secondly, there are all kinds of interests that you have to settle that many times, don't make business sense. Like, where do you cite projects, for instance? Like, where do you cite the if a particular location has the conditions to support, to best support the development of something, for reasons of political expediency, you find, people citing that thing that should benefit the whole country in a place that doesn't have, that is not best fit for that. So we are not honest as a people, right? So we don't follow our policies through to logical conclusion. You know, there's a lot of diversion. There's a lot of option. There's a lot of you know, a lot of things basically make us shoot when we are supposed to be giants. So Nigeria can compete with the Netherlands. Nigeria can compete with India. Nigeria can compete with the US in food production. We have everything to do that. We have the human resources, we have the land, we have the agroclimatic conditions, but we don't have the leadership to do that. So if we can address that, I think the farmers, on the one hand, are quite ready to produce, right? I think Nigerians are ready to buy. The market is there. But the gap is in the quality of leadership. At Akinwumi Adesina, when he was Minister for Agriculture, that's the now AFDB, African Development Bank president. You see the kind of leadership he brought to bear on the Ministry of Agriculture and how that impacted farmers, with small technology, like, sending text messages to farmers to notify them of, availability of fertilizers or inputs in the local government, just basically bridging that information gap, will cut off a lot of bureaucracy and make whatever inputs, whatever incentives are available to the local farmer to reach them. So we need technology. We need to encourage people, to produce and put our money where our mouth is, right? And then we will see the impact. But until we have that leadership, we will continue to crawl when countries like India and China and the US and the Netherlands and other smaller countries, are soaring. So we need to be able to sort out our leadership challenges. We need to, to provide technology that cuts off, the influence of human beings. Because as long as, you have a person that people have to go to, there will be corruption in Nigeria. So cut off that need for interface with human beings through the introduction of technology, and things can move at least an inch.
As a sustainability expert that you are, when the country, as well as other countries of the world, is faced with some climate change effects, like desertification, what role would technology play in helping to mitigate these challenges so food production in those areas are not really affected? Again, network challenges hits, but we will continue the conversation. Have you ever had to do some farming, even when you didn't really have the landmass? So these days I hear that you could farm some crops using just in the comfort of your home, not really having the space out there. There are methods that have been employed. Somebody told me recently that you could grow tubers of yam, just have the soil in a container, that is big enough to take the roots of the tubers of yam, and then you can have that. But there are so many other ways that technology has brought for us to be able to do that. If you are someone who is into agricultural production, if you're a farmer and you've ever made use of recent technology for food production, food processing, please feel free to share some of those knowledge with us via the comment section. Now back to the conversation of investment in agricultural production. A foreign direct investment in agricultural production in Nigeria is declining. What happened to local investment? So there are lots of ways that people make money these days. Some call it passive income. It may not be you who has the knowledge of the agricultural production, you who has knowledge of farming, but perhaps you have the capital that the person who has the knowledge needs. So why not form a collaboration? Come together, you invest the capital on agreed terms. By the way, if it involves you, if it involves you putting your money into some venture, then of course there should be documents specifying the terms of that agreement. So at the end of the day, everybody knows what they're getting. You put your money, the person comes in with the expertise, and that's some passive income for you. That way, some investments can get into agricultural production in Nigeria that would sort of shore up the deficit even as foreign direct investment drops. I believe my guest, Maurice Ekpong, is back. Good to have you back, Maurice.
Thank you, Blessing.
You know that we do not quit as Africans. And so, in spite of the network challenge, we will push through to have this conversation today. All right. So to the question of mitigating climate change, what role would technology play?
Okay, I don't know whether you can hear me. Because can you hear me? Yeah, so climate change, mitigating climate change is a very important question, right? What can be done to mitigate the impact of climate change in of Nigeria? In the north, for instance, you have flooding, in the south, for instance, and so forth. So two extreme weather conditions driving or impacting agriculture negatively. So what can be done? I think we need to look at our practices, right? Our agricultural practices, right? And we need to make certain investments in the right places. In terms of, for instance, desertification, to reduce the impact of desertification, or to slow down the spread of desertification, in the north and in certain parts of other parts of the country. There is plans by the African Union, for instance, to plant what they call like a green wall, right, in certain parts of Africa, including Nigeria, that is supposed to green up the area and reduce the impact of desertification in the area. So that kind of a project is required, where you plant trees that are drought resistant in the north to basically reduce to desertification. In the issue of say flooding, there's a lot that can be done. I was listening to a professor recently who spoke about the challenges with so-called water scarcity, right? And he said something profound, that the problem we have with water is not scarcity but management, right? Because we have a colonial system that sort of like channels water away rather than look for ways to address it. Because every year, you can predict the volume of water that will come. You can predict, when floods will come. So why don't we provide the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure that can basically accommodate that, reduce flooding, channel excess flood waters to certain reservoirs where they can be used for agriculture, they can be used for, industry, they can be used for other things. It's one of management. And I think, and the right strategy, we can sort of like manage the impact of climate change and use some of that to advantage.
Okay, Maurice. So there's a report that investment in foreign direct investment into the agricultural sector in Nigeria dropped by about 41%. So from 2023, the second quarter of 2023, it dropped from about $10 million to about $5 million in the second quarter of 2024. And this has been attributed largely to insecurity What is the way out of this menace? Having tried severally to overcome the challenge of network instability, well, I think at this point in time, we just need to let Maurice go. That's all we can take because of the network challenge that have interrupted a conversation with Maurice Ekpong this morning. But the question now is, what can be done to revive the agricultural sector in Nigeria? If investors are pulling out because of insecurity, then it behoves on governments to do more to ensure the security of farmers, to ensure the security of lives and property in Nigeria, so investors will be attracted to put their money in Nigeria. Meanwhile, local investors can also do more because food business is one that is lucrative. Everybody, remember, has to eat. I'm Blessing Eichie. Wrap up the show here. Tomorrow will be another time for the show to return 8 a.m. West African time. Market Insight comes up here on SOUQ News TV at 11 a.m. Follow us on the social media platforms at SOUQ News TV. Leave a comment, like, and feel free to share. Enjoy your day.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.